Good morning, everyone from Southern California. Welcome to another Human Side interview. My name is Mitch Jackson. I'd like to welcome you to Human.social, where you can find all of our past, current, and upcoming interviews at the blog and website. Today we have a very special guest, frankly an old friend of mine, someone that I've gotten to know over the years, and someone that's helped me win some big cases in court, somebody that has helped me obtain multi-million-dollar jury verdicts for my clients, and that's Miss Ann Miller. Ann, thanks for being on the show today, and before I kick the camera over to you, let me introduce you to our guest, if you don't mind. Ann likes to say that words matter, make what you say pay, and she's done that for me, and that's why I'm sharing Ann with you. She's an internationally respected author, speaker, and seminar leader. She teaches salespeople how to increase their business. She shows coaches, CEOs, and senior management how to communicate clearly, creatively, and persuasively. She enables tech and demo pros to transfer complex information into simpler, meaningful messages that persuade and get results. She's the author of several books. One of the books, which is what brought us together, that I highly recommend, is called The Tall Lady with the Iceberg, The Power of Metaphor to Sell, Persuade, and Explain Anything to Anyone. She's been featured on NBC Today in New York and on Bloomberg News Radio. Ann, thanks for being on the Human Side interviews.
Oh, my pleasure.
Listen, the power of a metaphor, it's something that a lot of people aren't using, and it's something that all of us need to incorporate into our daily activities, into our daily presentations, into our daily sales pitches. Can you share with our viewers what is a metaphor? And maybe, I don't want to put you on the spot, but can you share with us what's your favorite metaphor of all time?
Sure. A metaphor, excuse me, I have a bit of a cold, but I feel fine. You sound bad. A metaphor is merely a substitute or a comparison of two things that share a common trait, but they're not the same. So, for example, if you say John is a pig, well, he's not really a pig, but what your characteristics of a pig. That's all it is, the substitution. And then it has many cousins. Most the common cousin is analogy, when you say something is like something else. And from my way of thinking, given the business world and the business audience that we have, you really don't have to know the definitions, technical English 101 definitions of metaphor, analogy, and simile. What you need to understand is that they are comparisons. They help somebody understand what you're saying by comparing your point to something they know, and thereby making it familiar and resonant with them so you can get the results that you're looking for. Now, you asked me for my favorite?
Yes.
Okay. I had to think long and hard about that because, as you know, because you've been the subject of one of them, I do a Metaphor Minute newsletter every month, and I get stories from real people like you, and I went through them, and I love them all. But if you really asked me, I think I'm going to go back in history a little bit to Mark Twain. Mark Twain said, the difference between the right word and just any word is the difference between lightning and a lightning bug. And that has such power, right? There's a huge difference between those two things. And I really think, because I gave this a lot of thought in preparation for what we're doing today, that we're in another phase in business. You know, they talk about sales 1.0, you know, selling before the internet. Then there's business 2.0. When the internet arrived, and we have all this technology that makes us smarter when we go into a call and makes us social. But I think there's a negative consequence of that, which makes us have to look at something called what I'm calling business 3.0, okay?
Okay.
Which the more technology there is, the more information there is, the more change there is, and how people, and the shorter our attention spans, the more important it's going to become that we actually use lightning language. Otherwise, you're never going to break through. And metaphors and analogies are two terrific techniques for really capturing everyone's attention, driving home a point, underscoring your point, simplifying complexity. And anyone whose success depends on influence persuasion, change, getting a conviction, really needs to master this form. So that's why I chose his metaphor. It's lightning language that we all need.
It's lightning language that works so well if done correctly. And I picked up Anne's book and read it and follow her blog, and we've interacted. We've actually shared different metaphor ideas over the years that maybe we can share with our viewers. It's generating passion on the part of the listener. They're visualizing in their mind what you're saying if you use metaphors correctly. You're tapping into different emotions, different life experiences, where they can relate to those experiences. Therefore, they relate to the metaphor that you're using in your message. And when we're trying cases, and there's really no better way in the short attention span society that we're living in today for me to get my point across and entertain at the same time, because these people are, in court for 1 or 2 weeks, and part of what we do is we want to make it interesting for them to be there. We're not entertaining them, but we're trying to capture their attention. And so I use metaphors the way you showed me to do all of the above. Now, having said that, it was a process for me to learn how to properly look at the facts and then pick a metaphor that worked with those particular facts in my case. Do you have any suggestions, any tools? Is there anything in your book that might help our viewers or listeners on the podcast generate their own metaphors for their own particular use or needs?
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, the nice thing about metaphors and analogies is that people already use them every day in our language, filled with metaphors and analogies. When you say the course of true love didn't run smooth, or that's a train wreck waiting to happen, or oh my God, I don't have the bandwidth to process that, you are creating images. This is visual language. So it's something that people already do casually. In fact, I saw one study that said you really can't get through, I think, 6 minutes of conversation without using many, many metaphors.
Wow.
It's probably true. So the way to do it is what we do unconsciously is to make it conscious. In other words, this should be part of your strategy. If you're going in to make a sales call, or you're going before a jury, or you're going internally to recommend some change, you want to think through, what can I compare my key point to? The selling point that I want to make, the persuasion point I want to make, or the technical information that I need to help clarify. Get very clear about that. That's the first point, first step.
Okay.
And the second step is to say, okay, how do I get them to see it in their minds the way I see it in my mind? So I have to think about, what do I know about my audience? What common ground can I draw my metaphor from? And then you make the connection and apply it. So let me give you a simple example. Let's say one of my favorite ones is, many people in your audience, when they go out to sell, for example, unless they have the cure for cancer or the next iPad, pretty much their services are like other people's. Isn't that true?
Sure, absolutely.
So a buyer may say, well, you're just like everybody else. You're really not that different. It's not worth it to me to change. You're really the same. Tell me how you're different. And what a lot of people do will just continue to talk about the wonderful features and benefits and how people love them. But again, the person who's talking is seeing it in their mind. The guy or gal who's buying doesn't see it the same way in their minds. So that's the time you need a metaphor or an analogy to bridge the gap. And the one that I like for that commodity problem is to say to somebody like you, do you play tennis or golf?
Yes, I enjoy playing tennis.
Okay, fantastic. Okay. You know how I'm sorry, forget about that one. Different one. No, let's say that you're saying to me about the commodity, you're all the same. I would say to you, do you have children?
I sure do.
Okay. How many kids do you have?
We have 2 kids.
Okay. Let me ask you a question. Do they have the same personality?
Somewhat, but no.
No. How are they different?
Well, I would say our daughter, who's 20 and at UCLA, is right
You know,
now she's more focused,
that's
and
right. Freeze,
my
freeze
son's a
for,
little bit more free-spirited.
okay, freeze for a second. Everyone who's watching this and watching your face could see you going back with your eyes and seeing your own children, thinking about how they're different, right? I don't know your kids. I don't know how they're different or not, but it's not important that I know. It's important that you see the difference. So after you tell me the differences, I would say, exactly, both of these kids are your children, but each one has slightly different personality. And wouldn't you depend on one child for one thing and expect something else from another, depend on another child for something else? Of course,
Yes,
right?
yes,
Same
exactly.
is true with me and my products. Yes, we all are in the general widget field. But here's what clients find different about my services that will make a difference in your business. You see how that works?
I
Once I
do. I do. That's brilliant.
once I get you to acknowledge that you have children, and even though they're both kids, they certainly have different personalities, and they are certainly have different strengths. Well, then I have you. Because then it validates that I could be in the same general category of widgets or services, but even within that category, there are differences that could make a huge difference in the result, Mr. Klein, that you look at. Do you see how that works? Now, let's suppose you didn't have kids. I said, do you have kids? And you said no. All right. So what would you say? Your nieces, nephews, your friends who have kids? All you have to do is get them to see two different kids, right?
Okay.
So
Okay.
I'm not making some Shakespearean, flowery comparison. Wish I could, but I'm not Shakespeare. But I'm using that technique of comparison. But it has to be a comparison that you, my listener, can relate to. And you can take it from, so that's the second step. What do I know about my listener that I can tap into to create the comparison? Now, when you and I worked on one of your cases, we went through a few different possible comparisons. Do you remember that? Because usually the first one or two that you come up with aren't quite strong enough or it's not quite right. But once you hit it, you know you've got it, right? I don't know, do
Yeah.
you want to tell the story about your Russian roulette case?
Wow, that's right. You know, that was huge to me. I think being able to win this case that we had. I don't want to go into too much detail, but the case had to do with an ambulance company and some EMTs that negligently transported one of my clients' adult children. That ended up resulting in his death, and it was a non-emergency situation, and they didn't follow protocol. And I contacted Ann, and you shared with me a couple of awesome metaphors that really got the jury to sit up, pay attention, and appreciate the position that we were presenting to them during the trial. I don't know if you've got that metaphor in front of you, and if you do, you're more than welcome to share it.
Of course I do. Give me 1 second. Changing glasses. Let's see. Here it is. You said the defendant ambulance company played private ambulance Russian roulette. They knew that there would be a time when the restraints would not work, and they crossed their fingers every time they used them, hoping this wouldn't be the bullet that would kill. And then you said afterwards, that after you said that, you said, as soon as the words left my lips, I knew from their facial expressions that my jury understood the complicated issues and got it. And that's the power of a metaphor.
You
People.
know, and that wraps up our show today, everybody, because literally that did show what the power of a metaphor was. And in that case, it was a case where we were in court and in trial because the other side wouldn't step up and accept responsibility. And when the case was done, the jury came back with a 7-figure jury verdict. And not only found that the ambulance company was reckless and negligent, they found the ambulance company grossly negligent. That's pretty darn close to being an intentional act. And yes, it had a lot to do with that metaphor. I still can picture the eyes of the expressions of my jurors when I incorporated that into my closing argument, and I could just see the light bulb go on. They got it. So if I haven't thanked you, let me thank you now for that. That was just an awesome help, and I appreciate it very much. Okay, let's. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you.
Yeah. So, you know what's interesting is I love tapping into other professionals, and I remember sharing, okay, this is my fact pattern, and what can I do to help get my point across? And you jumped up, you shared with me some ideas, we went back and forth, and I was able to take the ball and run with it. See what I just did?
That's right. You can't get through too many sentences without using metaphors. It's just part of who we are.
It's pretty hard to do, and it made a big difference. And I think it would make a big difference for anyone listening to this interview, to this conversation. Start incorporating metaphors into everything that you do, because it's just a great way to communicate. Now, having said that, Ann, you touched upon this. How important is it to research and know your audience, their needs, their wants, their desires, their cultural differences, their biases, their differences before selecting a metaphor? If you're a football team and you've got a football-related issue and you're presenting an argument to a baseball team in a baseball-related argument, I mean, it's probably better to use a baseball-oriented metaphor than a football team-oriented metaphor, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. The metaphor has to fit. One time I was in a meeting, I was in an audience of a group of senior executive women, and there was a woman on the stage talking. I forget what the point was, some motivational thing. Anyway, she kept using football analogies and saying things like, when you're in the locker room, well, women don't talk like that.
Right.
They don't. It seemed like she got the Vince Lombardi, and she was giving it to a group of women. Now, it doesn't mean she couldn't use a sports analogy, but let her use one that we could relate to, not some football guy's locker room football analogy. It doesn't work.
Yeah. That's a big mistake I see speakers from the stage, I see lawyers in court make. They're not selecting the right metaphor for their audience. And let me switch directions with you just quickly. Can you share with our audience, and this is my favorite part of the show, can you take us back in time and share with us what first got you interested in writing, in speaking, in specifically studying the use of and teaching the proper use and effective use of metaphors?
Okay. I was originally an English teacher, and all English teachers are either frustrated writers or frustrated actresses. I was the frustrated actress, but I could also write. So I taught for a little while, then I left, and I got into various jobs on Wall Street and in the media world and the digital world. But I always liked the performing part. So when someone took me to a seminar, and I saw someone on the stage teaching to a group and playing the group, I thought, that's what I want to do. And so I switched into the training and speaking industry, because I love being on stage. I love working a group. I love not knowing what's going to happen. Even though I come in prepared, I like that immediacy. And then I always, as a teacher, I always like to see people do well. So it's very important to me in seminars that I can take people from point A to point Z, and that they leave better for it. So it's very gratifying to be in the training industry. That I can write is just, lucky, I guess. I can write, but don't assume that I just wrote the books by myself. Any writer always gets edited. You need a good editor to do that. But what started the interest in metaphors is I was teaching a presentation skills workshop to the folks at Business Week, and I mentioned metaphors in passing as a useful communication tool. And one woman raised her hand and said, this is very interesting. Is there a book on metaphors? And it stopped for a second, and I said, not yet. That's when I decided that metaphors and analogies really are a legitimate topic for business people to understand, master, and use. And that was a few years ago, and time has proven me right, because it becomes increasingly difficult to break through. And metaphors and analogies do that. They're just grabbers.
They are grabbers. And can you share with us your thoughts on how important is it on social media today, whether you are writing a blog post, you're sharing a tweet, you're commenting on someone else's post, to incorporate metaphors into your online communication activities?
It's critical. First of all, metaphors are good for headlines because they attract attention. And just about anyone who writes a blog, including myself, I would recommend that before you plunge into the content, which is usually left-brain kind of content, that you seduce, and literally metaphors and analogies seduce people into listening. That you seduce your listener by starting out with a story or a quote or something from the papers that acts like a metaphor, or that is a metaphor within the topic. Would you like to hear a simple example of that?
I would love to.
Okay. So this comes from my Metaphor Minute newsletter. And the article is really about a metaphor that this company uses to explain how they tailor their programs. But it doesn't start out that way. I start out the newsletter by saying, it's called Bond, James Bond. So right away you know it's not the regular left-brain newsletter. There's something interesting here, right?
Love it.
It says, how many James Bond movies have you seen? Do you remember how James Bond liked his vodka martinis? Shaken, not stirred. Short, sweet, clear, and memorable. Wouldn't it be nice to be remembered by clients for what you do with equally easy recall? That is often challenging when you and your competition all claim to have a process that is tailored or customized to client needs. One company, however, overcomes that obstacle quite effectively. So now I think you would want to read the rest of the blog, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. But if I just told you what they do right up front, you might or might not read it. But by using the James Bond lead-in, which is a right-brain appeal, that serves as a metaphor for the article. And I think any good blogger does that. Any good blogger should do that, for sure. And also, how you're known online can be metaphorically as well. You know, some people give themselves titles like chief adversary, like chief with 20 different kinds of titles, because again, like a metaphor and analogy, like chief whale hunter. You know, and there's a woman who's got a website called Whale Hunter. I don't know if she has herself as chief whale hunter, but that would be an example of using a metaphor to describe what you do.
Okay.
Did that make sense?
It did. Yeah, absolutely. It made perfect sense. And you know, you mentioned using metaphors in headings on blog posts, metaphors in tweets, anything that where you have to capture someone's attention. If you learn how to use a metaphor, it really does make a huge difference, and it keeps the attention of your audience. And I don't know if you want me to share this, but you and I talked about a year ago, and we exchanged some emails about. I asked you, can you put together some metaphors that incorporate the use of social media, different social media platforms? And you emailed me a couple of examples just off the top of your head. Do you remember doing that? And if so, do you mind if I just share a couple with our audience?
Go right ahead.
Okay, and I think we were talking about maybe doing an article together, but my whole thing was when I had a jury trial coming up, and I wanted to, it had to do with social media, it had to do with online business issues, and I wanted to try to capture the jury's attention. So you came back to me with some pretty cool suggested metaphors, and they're just rough drafts, but we talked about if the other side on my case wasn't able to really put together a good point, make their point at any point in the case, a metaphor I could use would be something like, his argument had all the substance of a tweet, or his defense had all the depth of a tweet. Telling the audience that, geez, you know, that thing had so much merit and thought behind it that any of us could have done that in 140 characters or less. Don't put a lot of weight on it. I thought that was brilliant. You also said, and we were talking about something, and here's another metaphor. What Washington needs is an app for political reconciliation. And I thought, wow, you know, what a great app that would be. Here's another one. She was a walking Instagram of designer clothing labels.
Right.
Instantly, we all know what that means. And then I think you said this one was one of your favorites. I post, therefore I am. I mean, how fun is that? It's just fun to kind of put these things together, and normally the audience is very receptive and appreciates the fact that you're trying to tie the two together, and you're making it easy for them to understand what's going on. And you've made this really easy for our audience today to understand and appreciate the power of a metaphor. You've made it really easy in your book for people to learn how to use metaphors, how to create metaphors. If I remember correctly, you actually have steps where you walk the reader through how to create a metaphor, and then at the end of your book you have page after page after page of examples of metaphors that people can use in particular situations, correct?
Right, right.
Okay. And I encourage everyone, if you haven't picked up Ann's book, to please do so. It's just fantastic. Tell us a little bit, Ann, what do you got going on for 2015? And if people would like to reach out and connect with you, pick up your book, follow your blog, pick up the phone, or connect with you by email, what's the best way for people to go about doing all the above?
Website, which is www.annmiller.com, and Ann is spelled with an E. And they can get the book, The Tall Lady with the Iceberg, on Amazon. And they can subscribe to the Metaphor Minute newsletter, which you can also find on the website. And I would love any of your readers or listeners to the newsletter. I always give people a free copy of the book if they send me the story that I use. And you ask what's new. I have something that I had hoped to have ready by today, but it's not quite ready. But I put together, I think, the first and only infographic on metaphors, the shortcut to yes. And I'm happy to send it to anybody who emails me at annmiller@annmiller.com. And Ann is with an E. annmiller@annmiller.com. I will send you the infographic, which was a lot of fun to do and captures a lot of thoughts about you need them, when you need them, has quotes from some famous metaphorians like Sheryl Sandberg and Steve Jobs and Arianna Huffington, and it's a really neat thing. And the other project that I'm working on is, as more and more people are doing demos online, I find that that kind of presentation training is really very, very needed, because most people wind up just fact and function dumping and really don't know how to tell a story. And so I'm working a lot with people who do demos online and in-person presentations. And again, the way to get me is amiller@annmiller.com. If you prefer the phone, 212-876-1875. 212-876-1875. Love to hear.
Awesome, Ann. Thank you very much. You are a superstar. You're my go-to expert when it comes to a need to communicate an issue, a message, a fact to my jurors to get 7-figure, 8-figure verdicts, whatever it might be. Really appreciate all the value you bring to your table. Really appreciate you taking time out of your day to be on the Human Side interviews. If anyone would like to connect with Ann, I'll have her contact information at the blog that accompanies this particular interview and podcast, which we'll be putting up later today. And you can always get a hold of me, and I'll put you in touch with Ann. Whatever works for you works for me. But Ann, thank you so much for being on the show, everyone. If you have any questions, reach out to Ann. If you have any questions for me, I can be found at human.social, our website and blog. And until our next show, I'd like to just wish everyone a great day, and remember to always make today your masterpiece. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you. Bye-bye.